Montana Territory, June 1873. The wagon hit a deep rut and pitched hard, throwing Olivia Ames backward into the dust like she was no more than a sack of grain. By the time she pushed herself up, coughing and dazed, the wheels were already creaking away over the ridge, her stepfather's voice barking orders to keep moving. They did not even look back. Her palms stung. One stocking was torn at the knee. Dust clung to her face and hair. She stared after the wagon, more confused than angry. But then the truth of it settled in her chest like a stone. They had meant to leave her behind. The sky stretched wide and pitiless overhead, the sun already high and merciless. She had nothing. No water, no food, no shoes beyond the ones on her feet. Just the dress on her back and the echo of her stepfather's last words, "You're more trouble than you're worth." She stood in the road for a long time, unsure where to go. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breathing steadied. Olivia had always been quiet, but not weak. She was 19 years old, raised in Missouri and hardened by years of silence and cold glances. She looked down the road the wagon had taken, then turned and walked the other way. An hour passed, maybe two. She walked until her legs ached and her mouth dried out. The sun beat down. The wind picked up dust and tossed it in her eyes. Her steps faltered, and then she heard the sound hoofbeats, slow and steady, coming up the trail behind her. She turned, shading her eyes. A lone rider approached, the kind of man the West didn't have many of anymore. His hat was low, blocking the sun from his eyes. A rifle was slung behind his saddle. His shirt was dusty, his boots worn from long travel. He reined in sharp when he saw her, one brow raised beneath the brim. "You walking alone out here, ma'am?" he asked, voice quiet but firm. Olivia swallowed. Her throat felt like sand. "They left me." He dismounted in one smooth motion, tall and broad-shouldered, his movements easy but alert. "Who?" "My stepfather. The wagon train. They just tossed me off." Kept going. He looked her over, frowning. Not the kind of frown that judged, more like he was trying to figure something out. "You hurt?" "No," she said, though her ankle throbbed. He took a step closer. "Name's Isaiah Langley." "Olivia Ames." He nodded. "Well, Miss Ames, you cannot stay out here. Sun will kill you before night falls." "I know," she whispered. Isaiah reached into one of his saddlebags and pulled out a canteen. He handed it to her, watching as she drank. Water never tasted so sweet or so necessary. She coughed a little and gave it back. He studied her again. "You got anyone waiting for you?" She shook her head. "Then you are coming with me." Her eyes widened. "Why?" "I do not leave people behind." She stared at him, unsure. But there was something steady in his eyes, something that did not waver. He was not trying to impress her. He was not asking for anything in return. He simply meant what he said. He helped her onto his horse, climbing up behind her. His arms bracketed hers as he took the reins again, careful not to crowd her. They rode in silence, the rhythm of the horse soothing in a strange way. She leaned back, just slightly, enough to feel the warmth of his chest behind her. They reached his small homestead by sundown. A cabin nestled near a stream, with a lean-to for the horse and a garden patch that looked well cared for. It was not much, but it was more than she expected. He helped her down, then guided her inside. "You can sleep in here," he said, gesturing to the bed. "I will take the chair." "I cannot take your bed." He looked at her. "You already did. Now sit." She did. He cooked beans and cornbread over the fire, setting a plate in front of her. She ate slow, still not sure if this was real. No one had ever fed her first before. Afterward, he brought out a basin and a cloth. "You can wash up. I will step outside." She nodded, and when he returned, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, hair damp and clean, her face softer somehow in the firelight. He took the chair across from her, stretching his long legs out and resting his hands on his knees. "You got questions?" he said. "I do not know what happens now," she admitted. "You can stay here as long as you need. I have work. Livestock, some trapping. It is quiet, but it is honest. And you are not worried what people will say? A man and woman alone?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Let them talk. I know who I am." She looked away, throat tightening. "You do not even know me." Isaiah's voice was soft now. "I know enough. I saw a woman tossed aside like she was nothing." "You are not nothing, Olivia." No one had ever said her name like that. Like it mattered. She lay in his bed that night, staring at the roof beams, listening to the fire crackle. The chair creaked once as he shifted. She found herself comforted by the sound. Not afraid. Not alone. The next days passed slow and steady. She helped where she could, pulling weeds from the garden, gathering eggs from his hens, sweeping the porch. He never asked for anything, but he noticed everything. When she rubbed her ankle, he brought her a poultice. When the sun got too hot, he led her to the shade and handed her water. Once, she caught him watching her as she braided her hair. His gaze was not bold, not possessive, just warm, curious. She looked away, but her chest fluttered. One night, after supper, she stood on the porch watching the stars come out. Isaiah stepped up beside her, close enough she could feel the heat of him. "Do you miss them?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm mourn the idea of a family, not the reality." He nodded, quiet. She turned toward him. "Why did you really stop that day?" "Told you. I do not leave people behind. But you could have. No one would have known." He looked at her for a long moment. "I would have known." Her breath caught. He shifted. "You do not owe me anything, Olivia. I just want you safe. That is all." She stepped closer. "And if I wanted to be here? Not just out of need, but want." He reached up, brushing a bit of hair from her cheek. His hand was rough, but gentle. "Then I would be a lucky man." She leaned into his touch. "Maybe you are." He smiled small, real. "Maybe I am." And for the first time in her life, Olivia felt claimed not as a burden, but as someone cherished. She had been tossed from a wagon and left behind. But a cowboy had ridden up, and in every way that mattered, he had claimed her future. The wind shifted that morning, carrying the scent of river silt and pine needles. Olivia stood at the edge of Isaiah's field, a woven basket looped over one arm, her fingers brushing the tops of young turnip greens. Her eyes followed the slow bend of the creek beyond the fence, where early sun flared gold across the water. The ground was soft from last night's rain, and her boots sank a little as she moved along the rows. A deep, short whistle cut across the stillness. She turned, shielding her eyes. Isaiah leaned against the gate, a length of rope coiled over one shoulder, his hat tilted back just enough to show the sharp angle of his cheekbone. He gestured with a nod. "Got a heifer tangled in the southern fence. Might take a bit of doing. You handy with wire?" "I can be," she said, brushing dirt from her skirt. They crossed the pasture in companionable quiet, his stride longer, but he slowed for her without being obvious about it. At the fence line, the young cow stood half-twisted between two posts, caught in the sagging wire, eyes rolling wide with panic. Isaiah crouched low, murmuring nonsense sounds that somehow soothed the animal. Olivia knelt beside him, reaching carefully to untwist the lower strand. "You ever set fence before?" he asked, his fingers steady as he worked the top wire free. "No, but I watched my uncle do it back in Missouri. He never let me help." He glanced at her. His mistake. They worked together without rush. When the heifer finally bolted free, Olivia sat back and blew hair from her face, her arms tingling from strain. Isaiah reached for his canteen and handed it over without a word. She drank, then passed it back. "You always this calm when something's stuck and angry." He shrugged. "Most things come free on their own if you give him time. Panic makes it worse." She looked at him more closely. "That how you live? Let things come free on their own?" His eyes stayed on the broken fence. "Sometimes. Other times, you've got to take a knife to it and cut yourself loose." She didn't ask what he'd had to cut away. Back at the house, Isaiah lit the stove while Olivia washed up. He reached into the cupboard and pulled out a small tin, handing it to her across the table. "Found this in town last run. Thought you might want it." She opened the lid. Inside sat a pair of sewing scissors, the blades short and sharp. Her throat tightened. "I hadn't said anything," she said. "I saw you threading that dull knife last week, trying to mend your hem." She closed the tin gently. "Thank you." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and sat across from her. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It had settled into something familiar, something that didn't need explaining. She sipped slowly, her hands wrapped around the warm metal. "You been thinking about what comes next?" he asked, not looking at her. "I have," she said. "I don't want to leave." His gaze lifted to hers. "You'd be welcome to stay." "I know, but I need to stay because it's right. Not just because there's nowhere else." He leaned back, one arm draped over the chair. "What would make it right?" She set her cup down. "Something of my own here." Not just your roof over my head. He nodded. There's a bit of land near the east fence I've never done much with. Flat enough for a garden, if you wanted. Her face brightened. You'd let me plant there? Wouldn't be letting. Be yours to tend, if you say so. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I say so. He didn't pull away. Later that day, they walked the eastern edge together, marking off the plot. Olivia knelt to test the soil, driving her fingers in, feeling its give. Isaiah stood a little behind, arms crossed, watching her in a way that made her skin warm despite the breeze. What made you settle here? She asked, still crouched low. He looked out toward the ridgeline. I came west after the war. Started further south, moved up when the land got too crowded. This place was quiet. Left alone. I like that. Were you alone long, before I came? He paused. Long enough to get used to it. Maybe too used. She straightened, brushing her hands against her skirt. You don't seem like a man who fears solitude. I don't, he said. But I never expected solitude to end the way it did. His eyes met hers. With someone planting roots beside me. She smiled, small and slow. I haven't planted them yet. You will. That evening, she sat on the porch steps, a length of cotton in her lap, patching a tear in one of Isaiah's shirts. He was splitting kindling by the woodpile, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, the steady thud of the axe a rhythm that soothed more than startled. He looked over once, and she raised her hand in greeting, the needle still threaded between her fingers. The sky darkened gradual, the kind of dusk that wraps quiet things in gold. When he finished, he came to sit beside her, his shirt still warm from work. They didn't speak. They just sat, side by side, breathing the same air, watching the last light settle on the distant hills. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Neither of them looked away. The first frost came early that year, silvering the grass in the hollow behind the cabin. Olivia rose before the light touched the window pane, wrapping herself in one of Isaiah's old flannel shirts that hung loose on her frame. The air inside the cabin was still, the fire burned down to embers. She stirred it back to life, coaxing flame from the coals, her fingers stiff from the cold. Isaiah came in from the lean-to, carrying a pail of milk and a bundle of firewood. His hands were red with chill, his breath coiling in the air. He set the wood down and crouched beside the fire, adding logs with practiced ease. You sleep? He asked without looking up. A little, she said. Been thinking about the root cellar. He straightened, brushing ash from his sleeve. Needs shoring. The western wall's starting to lean. I can help brace it. He nodded once. We'll do it after breakfast. They worked through the morning in quiet rhythm, hauling flat stones from the creek and packing them into the wall's base. Olivia's fingers bled where the rough edges bit through her gloves, but she didn't stop. Isaiah noticed, but said nothing until they paused for water. You always this hard on yourself? She flexed her hands. I never had the choice to be anything else. He passed her a strip of linen. You do now? She wrapped her palms without answering. By midday, the light changed. The wind shifted, bringing with it the low murmur of wagon wheels on the far road, distant, but distinct. Olivia's breath caught. Isaiah turned his head. You know that sound? I do. He stood slowly, dusting his hands. Want to see who it is? She hesitated. Only if you're with me. They crossed the field together, boots crunching over brittle stems. The wagon came into view where the trail curved near the ridge. A single driver, older man, sun creased and hunched with years. A woman sat beside him, thinner than she ought to be, her bonnet drooping over her face. They pulled up at the sight of the pair, the man raising a hand in greeting. Looking for water, he called. Our mare's near give out. Isaiah nodded. There's a spring by the bluff. Follow the fence, and you'll see the trail. The man tipped his hat. Much obliged. As they moved on, Olivia watched the woman's eyes flick toward her from beneath the bonnet. Pale blue and familiar. Her stomach turned. You know her? Isaiah asked quietly. My stepfather's sister. Aunt Miriam. She didn't speak much when I was little. Isaiah didn't press. They stood until the wagon disappeared beyond the rise. That evening, Olivia sat at the table sewing a new curtain for the loft window. The fabric, a faded green Isaiah had brought back from town, softened as she worked it through the needle. Across from her, Isaiah cleaned his rifle, careful and quiet, his motions slow with thought. You think they'll come back? She asked. He didn't look up. Not likely. They passed through like ghosts. She tied off the thread. Still unsettled me. He set the rifle aside and leaned back. You've made a life here. They can't take that. She looked at him then, something steady and unflinching in her gaze. I don't want what I've built here to feel borrowed. It isn't, he said. You've worked for every piece of it. I want to stay, she said, voice low. Not just in your home. I mean, fully. With you. He stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. I've been waiting on you to say that. Her hands trembled in her lap. I don't know how to do this properly, she whispered. No one taught me how a good life begins. He reached up, touching her face with a care that felt like reverence. It begins like this. Quiet. Honest. Nothing borrowed. I want to wake beside you each day, she said, eyes shining. Work the land with you. Build something that belongs to both of us. You already have, he said. But we can mark it proper, if you'd like. She nodded. He stood and reached for her hand. She rose with him, the warmth of his palm anchoring her. That night, they moved through the cabin like a single breath, laying another quilt on the bed, banking the fire for warmth, speaking only when needed. When they lay beneath the blankets, her head tucked beneath his chin, she listened to the steady beat of his heart and felt the last of the old fears slip from her bones. Outside, frost rimmed the windows, and the stars burned sharp against the dark. In the stillness, Olivia finally felt the weight of belonging settle around her, not like a chain, but like a shelter built strong and true. She had been cast aside once, but now she was home. The wedding was quiet. No preacher, no paper signed. Just the two of them standing under the cottonwood behind the cabin, Isaiah's hand steady against the small of her back, Olivia's fingers curled around a wildflower she'd picked that morning. He spoke his promise in a voice low and sure, and she returned it without hesitation, her words clear and without tremble. Afterward, they shared a meal of fried trout and roasted squash, the table dressed in a plain muslin cloth. He'd carved her a wooden spoon and set it beside her bowl without a word. She traced the edge of it with her thumb, the small curve of her name pressed into the handle. The first snow came 4 days later, thick and wet, laying heavy on the pine boughs. Isaiah woke early to check the roof beams, and she followed with a lantern once the cold light of dawn broke. They worked quiet, passing tools back and forth, the breath between them misting in the air. That night, he made her a chair of her own beside the hearth, its legs uneven but sturdy. She sat in it proudly, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and her feet tucked beneath her. A week later, Isaiah returned from the trapline with a fresh-cut yew branch slung over his shoulder. He laid it on the table and said nothing, just looked at her with that same measured patience he always carried. She ran her fingers along the grain, her eyes catching on the slight curve near the base. You want to teach me? She asked. If you want to learn, he said. She nodded. He shaped it during the evenings, showing her how to string it proper, how to oil the wood so it wouldn't crack in the cold. On the third night, he handed it to her without ceremony. She stepped outside in her wool coat, the snow packed firm under her boots. He set a tin can on a fence post and stood back. Her first arrow missed by a hand's width. The second struck the wood below. On the fourth try, she hit the can square. He didn't clap or shout, just nodded once and said, "You've got a good eye." The days leaned deeper into winter. They turned their chores inward, sealing the windows, smoking meat, mending what needed mending. Olivia took to drying herbs above the stove, tying them with scraps of spun thread. Isaiah started carving a second chair, this one smaller, though he didn't say who it was for. She didn't ask. The knowing lived quiet between them. One cloud-heavy morning, she found him outside the barn, a letter in his hand. The paper was creased and spotted with ash at the corner. You going to read it to me? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. He passed it over. From a man I served with. He's settled down near Deer Lodge. Wants help building a mill come spring. She read it once, then again, slower. You thinking of going? Not alone, he said. She held his gaze. You want to leave this place? No, he said. But I'd go if it meant something better for us. Olivia folded the paper. This land's quiet, but I'm not afraid of change. We'd come back once the job's done. Bring back coin enough to build a bigger barn. Or a second room, she said. He smiled, slow and real. Or that. They stood without speaking for a while, the cold wind tugging at their sleeves. Then she took the letter and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. If we go, she said, we go in the spring, after the ground thaws. Isaiah nodded. Then we've got time to be still. That night, they sat at the table by lamplight, her stitching a soft bundle of wool, his hands wrapped around a mug of cider. Outside, the snow fell without hurry, blanketing the garden she'd once claimed as her own. She looked up. You ever think about what it means? That I was left behind? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think it means they didn't see you. Not like I did. She set down her needle. And how did you see me? As someone who hadn't been given a chance to stay. She reached across the table, her fingers finding his. I'm staying now. He turned her hand over and pressed his lips to her palm. I know. The fire crackled low. The shadows on the walls shifted but didn't stray. And in the hush of their little home, with the snow falling steady outside, the life they'd chosen together rooted deeper with each breath between them. The days softened as winter wore down, the sky less burdened by clouds, the snow receding from the edges of the fields. Olivia stood by the creek one morning, watching the ice pull away from the rocks. Her hands were wrapped around a bundle of wool she'd washed and laid out to dry, the soaked cloth heavy in her arms. She liked the work, the way it gave shape to time. Beside her, the wind stirred the last of the frost-bitten cattails. Isaiah approached carrying 2 fence posts over one shoulder, his boots dark with wet earth. He set them down and looked at the stream. Water's rising fast this year. She nodded, squinting at where the current moved faster along the bend. We'll have to pull the lower traps early. I'll check them before sun sets. She hesitated. I'd like to come. He tilted his head. You sure? It's a hard walk with the ground this soft. I'm not asking to be spared from mud, Isaiah. He smiled, not in amusement, but in answer. Then bring your oilskin. It'll be slick near the banks. They left just after the midday meal, crossing the pasture with a sack of bait and Isaiah's shorter rifle slung across his back. The trail was half frozen, half thawed, and Olivia took care to keep her footing where the roots showed through. The creek's edge had broken open in places, and the current tugged at the reeds with a new kind of urgency. At the first trap, Isaiah crouched and reached beneath the waterline, pulling free a muskrat already stiff from the cold. Olivia didn't flinch. She crouched beside him, holding the sack open. You ever think we'll leave this land behind? She asked. He didn't answer right away. You thinking of going? No, but I wonder if the world's larger than I allowed myself to believe. He set the trap again, pressing the stake deep into the muck. It is, but big doesn't always mean better. She watched a leaf spin in the current. Still, I want to see more before I die. You will, he said. We'll go places when the time's right. She smiled then, faint but certain. You say that like you've already decided. I have. They moved on, checking 2 more traps before turning back. As they climbed the ridge overlooking their cabin, the sun broke through the bare branches, catching on the smoke rising from the chimney. Isaiah paused. You ever think about what kind of roof we'll need in 10 years? She looked sideways at him. 10 years. He kept his eyes on the cabin. If we're still here. If we've got little ones underfoot. I've thought about it, she said. But not with fear. He looked at her then, the wind tugging at his coat. You think you'd like that life? With you, yes. They held each other's gaze a moment longer, then walked the rest of the way home. The thaw came fast after that. Olivia spent her mornings in the garden, turning the soil with calm precision, her hair pinned up beneath a kerchief to keep it from her eyes. Isaiah cut lumber along the northern edge of the property, clearing out dead trees and dragging them down with the mule he'd bartered for late last year. In the evenings, they ate by lantern light, sharing bread and dried meat, whatever stew she'd stretched from their stores. One night, as the wind quieted and the stars came out clean and sharp, Olivia set a worn ledger on the table and opened it. What's that? Isaiah asked, his hands still streaked with sap. I've been keeping record, she said, of what we plant, what we bring in, what holds up best in the cellar. He leaned over her shoulder, reading the neat lines. You've got a mind for this. I want this place to last. It's not just a roof anymore. He touched the back of her shoulder gently. We'll make sure it does. She turned. I've also been thinking we should build a second room before the next winter. Planning ahead? I'm not planning for cold. I'm planning for company. He smiled then, the kind that reached his eyes. You're sure? I'm ready. That spring, the land bloomed wide and full. Olivia's garden took root with a quiet confidence, rows of early cabbage, onions, and peas pushing up through the dark soil. Isaiah built the second room with his own hands, measuring and framing it in the late afternoons until the light faded. She helped when she could, holding boards steady, reading from the plans he'd traced on scraps of paper. By summer, the cabin had changed shape not just in size, but in spirit. There was more laughter in the evenings, a rhythm of meals, and shared work that spoke of something settled and enduring. They took small trips into town when needed, always returning before dusk, always with a few new seeds or cloth or dried goods he thought she'd like. In early August, Olivia woke to the sound of rain on the roof and Isaiah's arm around her waist. She turned into him, her fingers brushing the curve of his jaw. "You still glad you stopped that day?" she asked. His voice was thick with sleep. "Every day since." She kissed him then, slow and sure, and he pulled her close, the warmth between them quiet and complete. That autumn, their first child was born, a daughter with Isaiah's dark eyes and Olivia's mouth. They named her Ruth, after a name Isaiah had once heard in a hymn sung far from here, back when he still wore a uniform and answered to men he didn't trust. Ruth was small and fierce, her cry strong, her grip stronger. Isaiah carved her a cradle from pine. Olivia lined it with wool she'd spun and stitched herself. The three of them passed their days with care. No grand declarations, no need for them. Just the thrum of a life built with hands and heart, row by row, day by day. And when the snow came again soft, not heavy, Olivia stood at the door with Ruth in her arms, watching Isaiah haul wood to the porch. He looked up, met her eyes, and in that small moment, years stretched ahead, clear and certain. She had not been spared hardship. Neither had he. But together, they had found something better than survival. They had found peace. And they had made it last.